He's a former Republican congressman and fierce critic of Donald Trump. Now he's hoping to be the next governor of Florida. Here to answer your questions and ours is gubernatorial candidate and Democratic frontrunner David Jolly. Good morning, David.
Good morning. It's great to be with you.
It is great to have you here. Thanks so much for coming. I'm glad that you're in town. Do me a favor and just start by describing the state for us these days. What is Florida?
Oh, my word. So look, I actually am a fifth generation Floridian, but I say it doesn't make me a lick better than somebody who moved here yesterday. But I have had the opportunity to live all over the state. I was born in the Tampa Bay area, live there today in Pinellas County. But I did grow up in Miami for 10 or 12 years. I lived in Pasco County when that was really rural before the information age. And I've lived in Pensacola. And so some people say we're 5 different states in one. We do know culturally we are remarkably different. You know, if you look at the diversity of South Florida, for instance, and kind of the gateway from the South, the cultural diversity, the diaspora, but you get into some of the rural communities in Central Florida, kind of the old cracker communities, if you will, the old Florida cracker communities, the Panhandle being lower Alabama and a little bit of the Bible Belt and everything in between. It is a remarkably diverse state. I do think whether you were born here or you've moved here, there's a certain dream quality to Florida. At least there has been. I guess part of the theme of this campaign is I'm concerned maybe that's slipping away from us a little bit, either because of the affordability crisis or culture wars. But I think Florida's always had a special place. You know, in running for governor, I've reflected on a moment sometime, I don't know exactly my age, but as a kid, when I became old enough, maybe 5, 6 years old, to realize, wow, I was born and get to live in a state that everybody wants to come to. And you realize it really is a special place. There's a reason so many of us call Florida home, wherever you are, from Pensacola to Miami or Jacksonville to Tampa.
And so you're in Northeast Florida today. What does Northeast Florida say to you?
Well, so that's a great question. There is a little bit of South Georgia in it as well. I've got some roots in Georgia, so I kind of feel a little bit of kinship. But obviously, when you get into some areas where you get to feel the pine trees and not the palm trees, that's a special place. You obviously have business enterprises, but you have very rural communities. You have the influence of ag, the influence of the coast. It's a very special place. There's a reason people celebrate living in this area.
And so you are an attorney. You have been an elected official. You're a former lobbyist.
I am. Yes.
And you are running for a seat that our current governor is term limited out of, and so it's going to be a scramble. But you're running as a Democrat. Tell us a little bit about your political evolution.
I am. Look, I'm a reformer at heart, and when people say former lobbyist, I was, and I actually stand by that. I've represented a lot of incredible clients, local municipalities. I represented a coalition of parents who lost kids to sex crimes. I worked in the defense space, the technology space. I don't run from it, but I will tell you, I'm a reformer at heart. I don't think former members of Congress should ever be allowed to lobby. I think there should be a lifetime ban, and I imposed that on myself when I left Congress, even as a former lobbyist before I ran for Congress. I think we need dramatic campaign finance reform. Frankly, I support public financing of campaigns now because, having served, I recognize that we have the most corrupt campaign finance system in the world. So I am a reformer at heart. I forget your original question, though. I'm jumping on my background a little bit.
Just kind of your political evolution, I guess.
Right. So I was a Republican in Congress, and I was kind of always a Bush 41 Republican. For people who remember the elder Bush, government had a role in our life. The economy should work for everybody. Frankly, and the third value I talk about is everyone should be welcomed and their rights should be protected. I saw that in the early Republican Party. Certainly there are criticisms of fail points in both parties, and I accept that of Republicans. I kind of fought the emergence of the Tea Party from within the party. We won a few cycles, keeping them at bay, but we lost to the Tea Party. Ultimately, when I was elected to Congress, I was a Republican member who supported marriage equality, climate science, gun control, eventually got to a place of supporting reproductive freedom, funding of reproductive freedom, at a time when the Republican Party was just continuing to go far right. And I'd never really had my home. Republicans didn't want me. Democrats didn't need me. I ended up leaving the party, largely around the final ascension of Donald Trump. That was the breaking point for me. I was the only Republican in Congress at the time to go up to the House floor, call on him to drop out. I never came around to support him. I ended up becoming an independent for 6 years, which I loved. That it informed my politics in such a way to be untethered from major party dogma. But ultimately, I found in the Democratic Party a home for the values that I have been practicing my whole life, whether in politics or out. The economy should work for everybody. The government does have a role in our lives and a responsibility. It's our government. We pay for it. And we should be a place where everyone is welcomed and celebrated, regardless of the color of your skin, where you were born, who you love, or who you worship. Those were values I tried to exercise as a Republican, unsuccessfully in many cases, but those are the values I see in today's Democratic Party, and I'm a proud Florida Democrat. I don't shy away from that.
Your views have changed on some of those things, but
They have.
having been a sitting member of Congress and a Republican, tell us what you think is happening. I mean, they've gotten a lot of criticism for sort of towing the line, falling in line for this president. What are the pressures that they're experiencing?
Yeah.
What are the choices that they're being asked to make?
Yeah, let me hit the first part of that because you're right. Some of my positions have changed. Change is part of my story. I think change is a strength. I think we need more politicians who, when faced with critical decisions, are willing to change. My values haven't, though, right? The reason I talk about those values is I believe firmly my values have been consistent throughout. But yes, it's allowed me to grow on some issues and change. I talk about that. Look, I will never understand the negotiation that many elected Republicans have made with themselves about accepting the direction of the party, because I served with them and I know that that's not where they were. And where in the first couple of years I may have given them grace for the political pressures, the incentive structure of our elections. Look, we need dramatic electoral reforms. We need gerrymandering reform. We should consider open primaries. We have to be careful about how that impacts communities of color and other communities whose voice have been under attack. We need radical campaign finance reform. We need to do a lot to remove the incentive structure that's pushing these Republicans to just fall in line and not to speak out. They're scared to speak out. However, I don't give them grace anymore. We're 10 years into this. If you have legitimate convictions and concerns about this president, as I do, that he is doing things that are straining the constitutional order, that he is kneecapping institutions that keep law and order in place and protect the Constitution, if you truly see that and you still fall in line, I'm sorry, you don't deserve grace. This is an inflection point in American history where we have to choose as a country whether we are going to defend what has allowed this experiment in democracy to succeed on the world stage where other nations have failed, and Republicans who are allowing it to slip away from us. That is why we have elections. And that is why, frankly, I am in this race, because I think we need change. This cycle in 26, whether it's the Florida governor's race or any race across the country, is a question of change versus more of the same because of the direction that this Republican Party, I believe, has led us into.
If you're just joining us, we are talking to Democratic gubernatorial candidate David Jolly about why he's running. If you have a question or comment, you can join our conversation at 904-549-2937, or you can email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. We have a call from Daryl in St. Augustine. Good morning, Daryl. Go ahead.
Hey, good morning, Ann. Great show. Good morning, Mr. Jolly. Governor DeSantis vetoed the Florida's free kill law, which 93% of the legislatures voted to pass. If you became governor, would you be willing to go against something that 93% of your legislatures supported? And would you not veto Florida's free kill law?
Yeah,
Thanks, Daryl. We should probably at least explain a little bit about what free kill is. It's an exemption for people within a certain age who don't have children, who, if they die in medical care, you can't sue for wrongful death.
Yeah, and I think we need to empower patients and empower families over, frankly, lawyers and insurance and doctors at times. I think the most important thing we can do is get back to a place of of balanced liability in situations like this. But this involves a case where you have someone without a family member. I disagree with what Ron DeSantis did. I think Daryl's question is fascinating, though, because is the test whether or not 93% of the legislature approves of something, or whether or not a majority of Florida voters approve of something? Because in a gerrymandered legislature, sometimes I do think we get distorted margins, but where 93% of the legislature is, I think, is a clear indicator. The area where I get more concerned about a governor going against the will of the people, in this case, 93% of the legislature, it was expressed But if you move, say, to the constitutional amendment process where over 50% of the state might vote to approve something, whether it's reproductive freedom, whether it's medical or recreational marijuana, whether it's open primaries, if more than 50% of the state approves that, I think the governor's responsibility is to fight for the people of Florida. To fight for the people of Florida, not to choose their own ideology, the governor's own ideology as though it is supreme and superior to the voters or to the legislature. I think that has to be considered. That has not been the posture of this governor.
We've got a call from Sally in Springfield. Good morning, Sally. Go ahead.
Yes, good morning. Thank you. I just wanted to bring it home with a question. What can a governor do about the price of groceries? I can barely afford the groceries anymore, not to mention a property tax or homeowner's insurance. It's really getting slowly, it's been getting worse over the last few years. And I can't see that anything is going to change, what with the tariffs or whatever else is going on. It's bad.
Thanks, Sally.
Yeah, thank you, Sally. Let's hit a couple things on what are generally contributing to the affordability crisis, including groceries. But let's start with housing because you mentioned insurance and taxes. There are very specific things we can do to make housing more affordable in the state of Florida for homeowners and renters. We are not the Fed. We cannot control interest rates. We can increase supply through additional workforce housing programs that are currently not being done through affordable housing. Workforce housing where we provide tax credits over 40 years or we provide land for development if in turn the units are provided for people of a certain income or a certain industry. But we also can move hurricane coverage out of the private market into a state catastrophic fund, reducing insurance, property insurance by 60 or 70% for homeowners, for landlords, for commercial properties, industrial.
And that's an interesting idea. I mean, taking out sort of the most catastrophic damage from a personal policy and putting it to a state policy. Who pays for that state policy?
So what we would do is fund a state catastrophic fund. We already have a hurricane fund that was started under Jeb Bush that has about $8 billion. It's used to bail out insurance companies, not homeowners. But we could build on that. Frankly, we could fund it through tourist development tax dollars. The reason you reduce your homeowner's insurance by 60 or 70% is because the private insurance market for natural disasters has collapsed. We've ignored climate science for too long. There is not an affordable way to cover big storms in Florida, fires in California, tornadoes in the Midwest. And so if we remove it and return private policies to just covering the traditional perils of a broken pipe, a tree falling, a slip and fall, you end up in an environment where insurance comes down 60 or 70%. But look, I'm a Democrat. I accept math. We have to fund the CAP fund. I'm not afraid to talk about how we fund that. Frankly, if we tax the profits of insurance companies, which we don't currently do, if we tax the profits of insurance companies and other corporations, we generate $3 billion a year in Florida. But we give that away. We let them ship their profits out of state. On taxes, we could provide first-time home buyer property tax relief, say $150,000 homestead exemption, a 3, 4, 5-year step up in basis, the inversion of Save Our Homes, where before longtime homeowners couldn't stay in, so we came up with Save Our Homes. We should keep that. But the issue now is first-time home buyers can't enter the market because of the escalation in taxes.
Sure.
So look, there's a lot we can do on policy that my Republican friends just won't do. They think that a CAT fund is socialism. I just think it's cheaper insurance. I think there's a role for government to step in where the private market is unable to do this. But on groceries, this is very important. There is not as much we can do at the state level, but there are a few things we can do at the state level. And it starts specifically with our ag communities and labor. Ron DeSantis's war on immigration is not a fight against crime. It's a fight against a community. And the labor markets in Florida are tight because of the fight against the immigrant community. We need to be able to go to the ag community as Democrats and say, look, we're all going to be tough on crime. But that means if you were born here or if you immigrated here or if you're a politician in Tallahassee who steals from the Medicaid program, we're going to enforce the law. But we're not going to fight a community. We're going to lift up our immigrant community and our workforce who contribute every day to our economy and to our culture. We can do that. And so for the ag market, they know their labor market is tight, not because the governor is afraid of their workers committing crime, but their workers are scared of the governor. The workers in whatever industry, in hospitality, in ag, in restaurants, in trades, They're not going home and committing crimes. They're going home and putting food on their table for their kids and getting them ready for school the next day and showing up back for work. But Ron DeSantis is suggesting every day that immigrants across our state are criminal, and it's tightening the labor market. There are some areas through both that space in labor, as well as in our ag sector in the state of Florida, where we can move products and produce from farm to store to table much more efficiently if we actually have policies that support those communities.
I just want to dial back for a second when you were talking about sort of stealing, or were you at a dig at Casey DeSantis, the governor's wife, and the Hope Florida investigation?
I will rely on the assessment of Republican legislators who have suggested that there was probably a crime that was committed and referred it criminally, and we now know that there is a grand jury. But yes, if $10 million was diverted from the Medicaid program through the settlement with Centene at the direction of our sitting attorney general, the governor, or the first lady, it should be investigated. And being tough on crime in Florida means not attacking the immigrant community who's just showing up for work. It means attacking politicians who may have engaged in criminal activity based on the assessment and investigation of fellow Republicans in Tallahassee.
In regards to Sally's question about prices, this governor has said he wants to eliminate or greatly reduce property taxes. That's his solution to the
Sure.
problem that Sally's experiencing. What do you think about that?
I was a Republican in Congress, and Republican math never works. It never works. And so I'm afraid that they're going to look to defund police and defund public education, defund safe communities, defund clean water. That's my fear. But I will also tell you, and this is also part of my posture, maybe my leadership style, we shouldn't attack it and condemn something that we haven't seen yet. Let's see what the proposal is. And let's consider it when they offer it. If it reflects a different set of values or is irresponsible in terms of providing for government services that are needed for our seniors, our vets, our storm victims, families in need of excellence in public education, if it abandons funding the basic services we need, then at that point we should oppose it. But we should also be prepared to offer some type of counter. I do think we need property tax relief for first-time home buyers. I think if we bring in some of the other revenue across the state, whether it is through tourism or construction, impact fees, whatever it might be, perhaps we can provide broader property tax relief. But the math has to work. We cannot drive ourselves across a fiscal cliff. Already we are looking at a fiscal cliff based on Republican budgeting in Tallahassee coming in about 24 months.
We've got a call from Jim at the Beaches. Good morning, Jim. Go ahead.
Good morning. Couple of items that I think might be worth noting. One is, why don't we go towards ranked choice voting like they do in Alaska? And then the other comment I have is sure, you can tax the corporations, but all the corporations are going to do is pass that tax on to the consumer. Why don't we look at broadening the tax base through other means, perhaps? And a lot of people say it's regressive, but a VAT tax or something of that nature, and then reduce other taxes. And I'll take my answer off the line.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate that. Let's jump in with a tax question because, look, I do think part of being governor of the state of Florida is accepting what Bob Graham and Lawton Childs used to talk about, the basic responsible administration of government. Are we providing good roads? Are we educating our kids? Are we creating a workforce that people can enter? And do we have revenue for that? I do think in a state where we have no income tax, where we manipulate the property tax formulas, we do. That's what Save Our Homes is. And we should keep Save Our Homes. Nobody's going to oppose that. We should keep portability. But we have created rules around revenue that perhaps have allowed us to be unresponsive to some of the needs of our services. I think we need a broad conversation over the next, what does the next 10 to 20 years look like for Florida's economy, and including on the revenue side? No one is going to cripple the tourism, ag, or construction industries. Those are our main drivers. But I do think we might be a state, if we're saying we're not going to have a sales tax, we're not going to have an income tax, and we're going to limit how we do property taxes, are we going to look at our tourism economy then for a revenue driver in a state like Florida? Because people are not going to stop coming to Florida because they have to pay $2 on a rental car tax or $5 on a hotel night. Tourism is down right now because they feel unwelcome because of culture wars and because they're scared of gun violence. So if we create an environment where a Democratic governor can say, in the home of culture wars of the last 8 years, welcome back, we apologize for the culture wars, we want the world coming back, and we're going to fight gun violence prevention. If we create an environment that people want to return to, they're not going to stop coming because of a tourist tax. We use that now. But right now we restrict our tourist tax to only be spent on tourism, to build convention centers and to advertise Florida out of state. It makes sense, right? It's logical. It's intuitive. I'm not suggesting it doesn't. But we have crises in the state of Florida. We have a crisis of funding for public education. We need a 10-year renaissance in funding of public education. We have a crisis of homeowners insurance in the state of Florida. We don't have a crisis of convention centers in the state of Florida. I think we have to begin to look, as Jim was saying, at what does the revenue environment look like in the next 10 to 20 years in the state of Florida that allow us to prepare for the services that are needed, and then put that question in front of voters, right? Should we divert, for instance, or increase a tourist tax for the next 10 years to exclusively fund public education? Put that question in front of voters on a ballot initiative and ask them what they want Florida to look like. There's a lot of conversation, I think, that needs to be had around what the economic and revenue environment looks like in Florida for the next several decades.
We have some more calls, but I want to ask, when you talk about a crisis in public education, it does seem that there has been policy changes that have greatly impacted funding for public education. That doesn't seem like a crisis. That seems like a deliberate restructuring of how we fund public education. And our governor has said, look, graduation rates are up, school grades are up. This is working. Basically, if we take funding from traditional public ed and route it to vouchers and route it to, non-traditional charter schools or even private schools, it's working.
He's citing report cards from conservative organizations that frankly didn't exist 5 years ago or 10 years ago and were created to support the choice community. Now, this is very important. Choice is here to stay. Choice is here to stay. If I'm a governor that can introduce a new conversation around education as a Democrat, this is where I want it to be. The crisis for the next decade in education across the state of Florida is that our choice schools are leaving children behind. The argument from Jeb Bush 20 years ago that our public schools were leaving kids behind has been completely tossed on its head because of universal vouchers to schools with no requirements and no service standards. What do I mean by that? Right now, freedom is being sold very powerfully by Ron DeSantis and Republicans, that choice is freedom, and it's a powerful drug, right? But what families aren't aware of is you're taking your voucher to a school that is not providing the same education that our public school is. So if your first grade kid can't read, that voucher school kicks them out. If your kid needs an IEP, an individualized education program, they don't have to provide it. If your kid's on the spectrum or has a disability, they don't have to provide services. If your child wants to attain academic excellence, take trigonometry, they don't have to provide it. Arts or the trades, they don't have to provide it. So you're taking this voucher money into a private school environment where the services are failing your family. Now, we are only in the first couple of years of this. This is the growing crisis in education. The reason I'm not out here to say we're going to kill the choice program is because families want choice. Okay, let's give it to them. But let's make sure it's a fair choice. Instead of kneecapping our public schools, let's have a 10-year renaissance in public education where Florida's families want to rush into the environment that still today provides greater access to academic excellence in the trades and the arts. But then let's put the same requirements on our private schools, our voucher schools, that if you're going to accept public money, you have to provide the same standards and services as our public schools. That is real choice. That is real choice. But I think we have to get away from where perhaps Democrats have been unsuccessful in the past just attacking the choice program. As a public school principal told me recently, choice is here to stay. But the solution is to make sure our voucher schools are providing the same services and standards. And then very importantly, cap the rate of tuition, bring back means testing. 70% of first-year voucher recipients under the Universal Voucher Program were already in private schools. It wasn't helping families in need. And now those private schools are adding tuition on top of the vouchers, so the most economically challenged families can't actually access the voucher program.
So you want them to have to cap their tuition increases?
Cap the tuition, bring back means testing, but put the same standard requirements on voucher schools that are on our public schools, and that's real choice. Ron DeSantis is manipulating this conversation around freedom and choice, but it is underserving Florida's families. This is not a fight by me against choice. It's a fight for Florida's families.
We've got a call from Tom on the west side. Good morning, Tom. Go ahead.
Good morning. This is a very interesting discussion. My question is this. Mayor Deegan here in Jacksonville is having to struggle for everything against a hyper-partisan city council. So I'm wondering how, if you were elected, how you would deal with a very Republican legislature.
I love that question. Thank you, Tom. And I smile because I truly mean this. I'm encouraged by this. And it requires us to look around the corner a little bit after November of 26. And this is what I mean by it. I'm running this campaign on the three values I mentioned. The economy should work for everyone, the government should serve, and everyone should be welcome. But I'm also running it to try to promote a state catastrophic fund to reduce insurance. I want radical gun violence prevention legislation that does not take away the gun of a responsible gun owner, but does prevent the next school shooting. Background checks, universal and comprehensive, look at licensing, registration, possibly insurance. Those are things that I'm running on. I'm running on a renaissance in public education, on reforming the choice program. And so this is what I'm going to ask you to think about in January of 27. If Florida's voters, in a deep red state like Florida, home of MAGA, where Donald Trump lives and Ron DeSantis has had a tighter grip on a state and the party than any governor we've seen, if Florida's voters allow the Democratic Party to lead a new coalition that represents those values but is bigger than the party and brings in independents and Republicans, if Florida's voters elect a Democratic governor, not if David Jolly wins. I mean that. This is not about whether or not David Jolly wins. If a coalition emerges in the state of Florida, it will be a political coalition we have not seen in this country in decades. And so then, as a Democratic governor, the Republican legislature has to worry less about me and more about the voters, because I get to set the agenda and I get to say, you tell your voters why you're against a CAT fund or a renaissance in public education or reducing gun violence, because voters have just asked for that. And oh, by the way, the new Democratic governor has a line item veto that the Republican legislature hasn't faced in a very long time. I will invite Republicans in to try to work together. The first thing I do will be to invite in Republican leaders from the legislature to say, how do we not waste the next 4 years through politics as usual, fighting each other? Let's do something on behalf of the people. But the people have just told us what they want.
We have a call from Nancy in Atlantic Beach. This might be our last call. Nancy, go ahead.
Yes, and I listen every morning, and when I heard what this was going to be about, I thought, oh, another boring political talk. So I was prepared not to listen. This was a wonderful segment of your program, and I had heard David Jolly's name before. I'm really going to listen to him from here on in, but the questions were fantastic. So kudos to the listeners and to your leading of the program. Thanks a lot.
Nancy.
Bye.
Thanks so much. So just a question kind of to wrap up. I mean, we talked about your political evolution. How do you tell Democrats that, you're doing this because you're aligned with them as opposed to a political opportunity? And we should mention in that context, there's some big names on the Republican side, including Trump-endorsed Representative Byron Donalds, former House Speaker here in Florida, Paul Renner.
Right.
And we don't know yet if Casey DeSantis will throw her hat in the ring or if the Lieutenant Governor, Jay Collins, will do the same. So formidable opponents on the Republican side. Sure.
No, that's exactly right. And look, a lot of people ask about my evolution, and it is a very fair question. Kick the tires a little bit. Ask me the hard questions. I want you to. My story is a story of change. And I test a different question in politics. Past politicians who changed on positions, they waste so much time trying to convince us they haven't really changed. They try to convince us that change didn't happen because we think change is bad. I think change is good. I think the problem is in politics isn't people who change, it's people who won't change. And so, look, if you take the question of reproductive freedom, when I got to Congress as a Republican, I was wrongly applying my faith teachings to a constitutional question. I'm a preacher's kid who grew up in a Christian home. My wife and I still practice our faith, but I learned along the way that my faith should stop at the steps of the state house. And in a state where religion has been used as a cudgel for 8 years in culture wars, my job is to fight for the dignity of everybody, of all faiths, and people of no faith at all, who frankly may identify as agnostics or atheists, but on most days are more charitable than people who sit in church pews. But my faith is my faith, and I was wrongly applying that to some questions when I got to Congress, and I started to change. Right? I ended up becoming the only Republican to vote against the Planned Parenthood investigation. I fought to save reproductive or funding for reproductive services in underserved communities. On guns, I was generally approaching it with a Second Amendment position, though I was never the NRA type. But I moved after several shootings when I was in Congress to realize we've got to do something aggressive about this. Change is part of my story. And so I test a different question in politics. Is it okay to change your mind? And is leadership really about facing the facts of the moment and deciding how it impacts communities and arriving at the right answer regardless of your party? That's why when I entered this race and every day I talk about those three values, because what hasn't changed is I think the economy should work for everybody. I think we should congratulate success, not condemn it, but our economy is leaving people behind. The lowest wage earner, the worker, the family trying to put health care in place for their family, put food on the table. The government should serve our people in education and safe communities, and everyone should be welcome. Their rights should be restored at the ballot box. People should be celebrated for who they love and who they worship. Teachers should be able to teach. The book should come back. The handcuffs should come off. We should be a state that recognizes if a local community wants to paint a mural, God bless them, go do it. Return to a place where dignity is given to everybody. Those were values I tried to exercise as a Republican. I've had them my whole life, and I find a home with them in today's Democratic Party.
Well, the most important thing is to vote. The election is November 3rd, 2026. David Jolly, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Great to be with you.